hello, or konnichiwa, as said in Japan, and welcome to today's episode of Zachipedia. Now, for today's episode, we're going to discuss the Japanese Revolution. Now, what exactly was the Japanese Revolution? Well, in this episode, I'm going to teach you all about the Japanese Revolution, how it began, who were the contenders, how it was fought, and why. Now, before we get involved in the war, let's go a little bit on its backstory. Well, for about 2,000 years, Japan was a kingdom in the Western Pacific, like its allies, China, Korea, and Russia. However, in 1903, it became independent from Qin, or the Chinese Empire, that it had been a part of for about 400 years due to its economic downfall and just plain old weakness due to the monarchy failing. Now, when it first became a nation, they thought that they shouldn't reincarnate the monarchy. That kind of a bad vibe, so they thought that might cause another demise. However, they didn't really know where to start. So, of course, nearby superpowers like Australia, the US, Great Britain, and more came in and contributed their ideas to help found Japan. Now, unlike other countries, though, that actually were completely founded by the other nations, Japan only took some of their ideology and mixed it in to make their belief in ruling. But they still got their way, for it turned out to become a capitalist democracy. Now, when Japan first became this, there weren't really any problems. For many years, it thrived and became powerful. The people never really had any problems. There were never any conflicts. And everything seemed to go perfectly normal. However, some things started to happen that made a little shift. Well, for one thing, in the 1930s, Great Depression swarmed to Japan, which caused an economic downfall. It caused hunger, starvation, and joblessness throughout the entire country, and people were begging for help. However, their president, Juan Mitsuharato, didn't do anything about it. Also, there were some conflicts, possibly with the capitalism. For the market economy, it wasn't really doing enough, and that it just wasn't working out. It was giving too much money to big businesses, which weren't really beneficial too much to the peasants, for they weren't really giving them jobs due to the Great Depression. However, the biggest turning point, which you could say caused a shift closer to the revolution, was when, in 1935, it was discovered that the president, Mitsuharato, had actually rigged all of the elections that he ran for. Since in Japan at that time, there wasn't a limit on how many terms you could run for. And he had ran for 9 and won all of them. Well, after this, people started getting extremely angry, and a group of people called the Nationalist Party was founded, who were basically, you could say, the majority of the Japanese people who wanted to end Mitsuharato's rule and put in a new leader or a new form of government that could possibly end the Great Depression and end the economic downfall, and stop giving too much power to big businesses, and give some of the Japanese power some equality. And eventually what happened is that they started doing basically protests and rallies trying to basically demand Mitsuharato's resignation. However, he never resigned. But later that year, the military came in and overthrew him. And the military took power. Now, some people actually got pretty excited, and they were very happy because they believed the military, since they were actually people, believed that they might give in some of their real contributed ideas, and that they might rule the best way. And the military didn't rule like Mitsuharato. They converted to fascism, a form of patriotism or way of government that put lots of power in the military, which of course they went through. And they also ended up ruling through a council of the top ranking and most powerful and most well-respected military generals to rule the nation. Now, this remained like this for about another 4 years, until in 1939, Japan made a pact with the Axis powers of Germany and Japan to begin World War II. To do this, Japan started conquering nearby nations with its power. First, it conquered China, and then Taiwan, and then the Philippines, and then much more, officially making it an empire, or Imperial Japan. And, of course, they chose Hideki Tojo, one of the most respected and powerful generals in the council, to be emperor. Now, people really supported this, and this really did have an effect, for they were winning the war and were getting very and majorly economically powerful, and their military was strong and the empire was thriving. Well, at least for a while, you could say. In 1945, Japan lost the war, and they had to pay billions of dollars in reparations, more than they could handle. They began printing money, which made the Japanese money worthless, another economic downfall caused. And many people lost their jobs and ended up becoming poor, and many other worse things occurred, and people wanted to change. And on top of that, Japan lost a lot of their land. The only thing that still made it an empire was a few islands. Taiwan was ended up buying its independence in October of 1945, and a small fragment of South Korea. So really, there wasn't really much to it. So people wanted the empire to end. They thought that maybe there was basically not really enough, and that the empire wasn't working out, that it was too old, that the capitalist democracy would work a lot better. However, the nationalists did want this, but of course the Japanese empire and the government, especially Hideki Tojo, didn't want this to happen, and they forced people to believe, or else they would silence anyone who co-convened, especially a nationalist. Now also, the military was still very weak after this, so they could easily have been overthrown. Now, the people in the Nationalist Party believed the only way to end the fascist, military empire was to secede from it and conquer the Japanese empire and then turn it into a capitalist republic. Now, to do that, in December 7th of 1945, the Nationalists declared war on the Imperial Japan, or the Japanese Empire. Now, the Nationalists basically represented the majority of the Japanese people, and basically they kind of made their bases in kind of the abandoned islands of Okinawa and Sofugan, right in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And instead of going into immediate battle, like most wars, the Nationalists didn't want to fight yet, for they felt they were unprepared. For most of the people fighting in the army represented the people, who were basically either farmers or peasant workers. So they would have well-trained military generals train them in these camps. How? Well, most of the generals were either Japanese generals who had seceded from the army and joined the Nationalists, or the Nationalists may have conquered that part of the army and captured them and forced them to train them. Now, a few months in, the prepared and powerful Nationalist Army began fighting in April of 1946. And basically, the government didn't really have a chance. The empire was still weak from the war, and the Nationalists kept swarming in with their powerful weaponry and their well-experienced soldiers, and immediately started beating and just basically defeating all of the empire. Now, instead of just taking the empire right in its capital, they started, which was, in my opinion, is very wise, taking certain cities, major cities all over Japan, and imposing their capitalist democratic rule, and using them as bases to spread onward to the country. And now, basically because of this, they ended up basically still winning. And in late 1947, the Nationalists had went into Tokyo, which was the capital city, which forced Emperor Tojo and members of his inner circle to go into exile elsewhere in Japan, since no other country would take them in. But now, so basically though, you're probably wondering, what are the U.S. and all these other capitalist republics that are trying to support this? Well, believe it or not, the U.S. and the Soviet Union and the other countries didn't really get involved. Why? Well, they were in the middle of basically a Cold War, a standoff for basic rights. And they were still, as the Japanese, recovering from World War II. The U.S. did give some aid and support, but the one you could say was the most helpful was the Soviet Union, for they supplied heavy artillery, sent in politicians to come and make speeches in Japan, and many other ways that were extremely helpful to the nationalists. Now, after the emperor went into exile, the rest of the war was kind of a wild goose chase of the nationalists trying to find the emperor. So the only way to end the war was to get rid of the leader. However, in June of 1948, basically radio signalers and spies of the nationalists finally found Emperor Toho hiding in a palace in Sapporo, northern Japan. They immediately sent armies and troops, nationalists, all the way to Sapporo and fighting in the castle, trying to kill and capture the emperor. Now, even though the armies, you could say, were equally matched, the nationalists were easily winning. And within an hour of the battle, they were already able to send in troops into the interior of the palace to subdue and either capture or kill the emperor. However, after the small platoon killed the rest of his bodyguards, they noticed that the emperor wasn't there. And basically, it was discovered that they actually went in searching through the entire palace, and they didn't discover him until the very end of the battle, where spies caught him trying to basically escape with two handmaidens who were well trained, where most historians believe to his private jet to escape all the way to the Korean territory. However, a sniper of the nationalists sniped and killed him and his handmaidens and guards, and they officially won the Japanese Revolution. Now, what happened? Well, of course, Japan became a republic with a market economy, and the people were doing very well, and the presidents never took up too much power like Mitsuharato. Well, because, like the U.S., you can only run for 2 terms. And there was never abusing of power, and the big businesses are still very successful, but the people now have jobs, and as one of the best economies in the world, and so far there aren't really any downfalls with it. So I guess you could say everything is all well. Well, I hope this video taught you pretty much the entire basis and the big picture and a lot of more fill-in details of the Japanese Revolution. And I hope it helped you learn a lot about it. Now, before we go, I have to tell you that this video was the last video in my first subject spotlight, which was recent wars that were practically unheard of. So my next subject spotlight, which is going to be the foundation of modern-day countries, is going to begin in 2 weeks with the beginning episode, the formation of the United Kingdom. Now, until then, you should still stick around, because I might post a special edition episode on Thursday for All Hallows Eve, or Halloween. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope it taught you a lot, and as I said before, so farewell all.